Hello guys, Croft is here. For over a decade, James Cameron's Avatar has painted Jake Sully as the triumphant hero. The human who goes native, unites the Na'vi and defeats the oppressive RDA. But if we actually examine his actions beyond the surface level hero narrative, a completely opposite picture emerges. If we remove mythic framing, emotional appeal, and the heroic music, Jake Sully becomes something else entirely. The ultimate villain of the Avatar universe who wants to doom his own species to extinction. James Cameron's films emotionally manipulate the audience into seeing Jake as the hero. But the moment you apply cold logic to his actions instead of feelings, the truth becomes obvious: Jake is the villain. So Jake's story is not one of liberation, but of betrayal, escalation, destabilization, and the irreversible collapse of humanity's last hope for survival. And the most wicked part is that Jake does all that while seemingly having good intentions, unable to see the big picture. So let's closely examine Jake Sully's identity crisis, moral failures, betrayals, and repeated destabilizing decisions that transform him into a central antagonist of the Avatar franchise. I actually really like Avatar, and this is just a theory and an ongoing discussion, so leave your thoughts in the comments. If we factually examine the events of all three movies, it becomes obvious that Jake causes way more suffering for both humans and Na'vi, way more than Courage. Courage may seem evil on an emotional level, but he actually saves his son Miles, while Jake fails to protect his, Nateum. But let's examine everything in order. The entire story of Jake Sully begins in a violation, a hijacked life, and the betrayal of Tom's vision. Jake Sully's villainy begins way before he even sets foot on Pandora. His avatar body, the Na'vi hybrid he eventually transferred into permanently, was never meant for him. The avatar was created for his twin brother Tom Sully, a scientist who dedicated his life to the Avatar program and dreamed of building harmony between humans and Na'vi. Tom's death gives Jake an opportunity to step into a life he was never prepared for and never earned. Instead of respecting Tom's peaceful mission, Jake takes control of his avatar, and it leads to a violent escalation, betraying Tom's scientific legacy. Tom Sully believed that the key to a peaceful relations was cooperation, communication, and mutual understanding, but Jake disregards all of this. The moment he arrives on Pandora, he doesn't follow Tom's vision. Instead, he replaces it with brute force, emotional impulsivity, and ultimately violent revolution. Worse still, when Jake mates with Neytiri, he does so inside Tom Sully's avatar body, a body designed from Tom's DNA, not Jake's. So from a biological and cultural perspective, Jake's children aren't even really his own. They're the offsprings of his consciousness fused into his brother's genetically tailored body. In a bizarre way, Jake's family is built on identity theft, so this is not a hero's beginning. It's the beginning of a villain wearing the skin of a dead man. And that becomes the foundation of Jake's identity crisis that fuels his destructive path. From the first moments on Pandora, Jake experiences a profound identity collapse. As a disabled Marine, he struggles with feelings of inadequacy. As an accidental avatar operator, he lacks purpose and even admits that his identity is fractured. And once he begins embracing Na'vi life, he rejects humanity entirely, condemning his own species as irredeemable. Jake seems to hate humanity so much that he literally becomes an alien and dooms billions of people on Earth to die. And this unstable psychological foundation becomes the fuel for his reckless decisions. Jake doesn't transition into Na'vi culture, he escapes into it. He abandons his duty, betrays his mission, and falls into a kind of cultural fantasy in which violence becomes the only language he understands. So instead of helping build a bridge between two civilizations, Jake becomes the sledgehammer that destroys any chance of coexistence. But what's most fascinating is that Jake perfectly hides his villainy behind good intentions that eventually lead to the worst possible outcome for both species: full-scale war. And it all started with Jake directly causing the destruction of the home tree in the first movie. People often blame the RDA for the attack of the home tree, but they ignore how Jake orchestrated the entire disaster. He infiltrated the Na'vi under false pretenses, manipulated Neytiri and the clan to trust him. He also withheld the truth about humanity's intentions and failed to negotiate or communicate a peaceful solution. He waited until the last possible moment to reveal anything. So by the time he tells the Na'vi the truth, it's too late.
Since a deal can't be made, I guess things get real simple. Jake, thanks.
Jake was the only person capable of preventing the catastrophe, but instead his indecision, emotional entanglement, and betrayal led to the very event he claims to oppose. The RDA executed the destruction, but Jake engineered the conditions. Even Quaritch, despite being portrayed as the bad guy, used smoke grenades first to avoid casualties. And probably the worst aspect of Jake's villainy is that Jake betrays his own species and dooms humans to extinction.
Hey Sully, how's it feel to betray your own race?
Jake's most defining act of villainy is his complete hatred and betrayal of humanity. The franchise somehow makes this betrayal seem noble, but the truth is actually sinister and demonic. In The Way of Water, the film explicitly states that Earth is dying. Humanity cannot survive as species without Pandora and might need to relocate there.
Earth is dying. Nothing less than to make Pandora the new home for humanity.
The settlements on Pandora exist because it is humanity's last chance to survive as species. It's no longer about resources, and Jake perfectly knows this. However, he puts his entire alien family on the line just to prevent humans from settling on Pandora. And for over 10 years, Jake leads a guerrilla insurgency against human settlers. Settlers who, unlike the RDA soldiers, largely consist of scientists, civilians, and refugees, trying to prevent the collapse of the human race. However, Jake does not attempt negotiation, he doesn't attempt coexistence. Jake doesn't even attempt peaceful integration, instead, he fully embraced the Na'vi absolutist perspective. He sabotages, terrorizes, and destabilizes the only lifeline for billions of humans back on Earth. So in the simplest moral terms, Jake Sully chooses one alien species over the survival of his entire race. That's not heroism, this is genocide by negligence. And by doing so, he fractures his own family and further sabotages relationships between humans and the Na'vi. In fact, Jake is the sole catalyst of the human-Na'vi war. In The Way of Water, the humans make it clear the war only continues because Jake Sully continues to exist. That's why Quaritch just needs to capture Jake Sully to end the war. And multiple times, characters state that if Jake Sully were surrendered or neutralized, hostilities would cease. Human and Na'vi coexistence would resume and the conflict would end peacefully. So Jake isn't just a soldier in a war, he is the war personified who turns his teenage kids into soldiers and they pay for it with their lives. His personal rebellion is so destructive that every human settlement, every Na'vi clan, every creature in Pandora's ecosystem suffers because he hates humanity so much and refuses to stop fighting. The Pandora war isn't between species. It's between humanity and Jake Sully, and Na'vi are just stuck in between. And that's the mark of the ultimate villain, not a savior. It's almost impossible to imagine a greater villain than Jake Sully. He isn't some alien monster trying to destroy humanity from the outside. He's something way worse. Jake is the ultimate traitor, a human who didn't just change sides in a human war. He stabbed his entire species in the back. He hates humanity so bad that he discarded his human body and transferred his mind into an alien avatar. But Jake not only dooms humans, he pulls thousands of peaceful Na'vi into his war. For example, Jake drags the peaceful Reef clans into a war they never wanted. One of the clearest indicators of Jake's villainy is what happens to the Mitkaina in The Way of Water. They live peacefully, they avoid conflict, and they do not engage with human settlements.
But we Mitkaina are not at war.
We cannot let you bring your war here.
And then Jake shows up. They tell him they are a peaceful clan and do not want war, but Jake just can't help himself. Within months, the RTA burns multiple coastal villages. The sea dragon hunts Tulkun to provoke Jake, and eventually the Mitkain are drawn into open warfare. So as the result, their children are harmed, their ecology is devastated, and clan members die for a conflict that was never theirs. Jake insists that he is protecting them by hiding there. In reality, he dragged them into a conflict he personally created. So every burned reef village is a direct result of Jake's refusal to surrender himself. Another major point is that the Tulkun massacre happens solely because Jake exists. Before Jake arrived, the Sea Dragon crew specifically avoided Metkaina waters, as it is stated in the movie.
If we start hunting here, the hostiles will come after us.
Exactly. One hostile in particular.
They knew that Tulkun were sacred and they had no reason to provoke the reef clans. But the Sea Dragon captain breaks this rule for one reason. Hunting the Tulkun will draw Jake out. The Tulkun massacre, one of the most emotionally devastating events in the film, exists entirely because humans are trying to locate one man. Jake's presence escalates the stakes to nuclear levels. The Tulkun and the Mitkaina are slaughtered, and one of Jake's own children is killed. Therefore, this is not the trajectory of a hero. This is the long, bloody trail of a man whose existence destabilizes planetary ecosystems. I know it sounds a bit dramatic, but it's actually true. Jake Sully is Pandora's worst nightmare. But probably worst of all, Jake's children die and suffer because of his obsession with war. Jake's role as the leader of the insurgents comes at a catastrophic cost to his own family. His children are hunted, kidnapped, injured, traumatized, and his firstborn is ultimately killed. Death of Nataeum is the turning point of the entire saga, and it sets in motion an even larger escalation in Avatar 3. All of that is because Jake refuses to negotiate, refuses to surrender, and refuses to accept any vision of coexistence that involves humans surviving. A hero protects his family. However, Jake sacrifices his family to satisfy his ideological extremism and hatred for humans. And the last and probably most important point is that Jake's moral philosophy is fundamentally anti-human. Throughout both films, Jake repeatedly reinforces a worldview that positions humanity as corrupt, doomed, and unworthy of survival.
The aliens went back to their dying world.
His solution is always the same: humans must stay away from Pandora and pretty much just die. But the entire human race cannot just stay away. As it was mentioned in the movie, Earth is dying and billions of lives are at stake. Refuge on Pandora is not a luxury, it is a necessity. Jake's view condemns billions to death so that a single alien culture can remain untouched. This is not noble, it's a cosmic-scale selfishness. Therefore, Jake Sully is the villain of both Pandora and Earth. Jake's war guarantees endless conflict for centuries. If Jake wins, billions of humans die out and Earth collapses. The survivors on Pandora remain hunted and the RDA never stops returning. At the same time, the Na'vi society remains militarized and radicalized against humans indefinitely, so Jake is the vector of permanent war. However, if Jake loses and surrenders, the conflict ends. Tensions between humans and the Na'vi de-escalate, coexistence becomes possible, and cooperation replaces endless war. Humanity survives in limited, isolated, terraformed settlements on Pandora, while the vast majority of the planet remains intact and protected for the Na'vi. In this outcome, both species endure and the cycle of destruction finally stops. To be honest, initially I did not view Jake as the bad guy because he had good intentions. But the more I think about it, the more Jake seems like the true villain in Avatar. Jake began as a lost marine looking for a purpose. But in the vacuum of identity, he became something far more dangerous. A man whose personal transformation comes at a cost of planetary stability, interspecies diplomacy, and ultimately the survival of his own people. So in conclusion, Jake is the ultimate villain because, first of all, he betrayed his brother's peaceful vision. He failed to prevent the destruction of the home tree. Jake also betrayed humanity during its extinction crisis. In response, he waged a decade-long insurgency instead of seeking peace. Therefore, he is the sole reason humans and Na'vi cannot coexist. And he keeps dragging peaceful clans into war. On top of that, he is ultimately responsible for the death of his son, Nateum, and even his own family constantly suffers because of his terrible decisions. Cameron's films emotionally frame Jake as the hero, but the cold facts and logic of the narrative is undeniable. Avatar's true villain has been standing at the center of the story the entire time, wearing the face of a hero. Thank you guys for watching, but what do you think? Do you agree with this theory that Jake is actually the villain and the reason the conflict keeps escalating? Leave your thoughts in the comments, also like the video if you enjoyed it, and subscribe to the channel for more content. My name is Croft, and I'll see you in the next video.